There is a county in West Virginia where the population has fallen by 60% since 1980, where the median home costs less than a used pickup truck, and where the county still cannot guarantee that the water coming out of your tap is safe to drink. That is not a third world statistic. That is Tuesday in parts of Appalachia. There is another town, a few counties over, where a chemical plant leak once sent a toxic cloud over a neighborhood in the middle of the night, and the plant is still running today. Appalachia gets marketed two ways. Either it is misty mountains, front porch banjo music and cabins for $40,000, or it is a punchline about toothless stereotypes. Both versions are lies of omission. The real Appalachia is a region of 13 states, 423 counties, and a set of economic wounds that have never fully closed since the coal industry stopped needing as many miners. Some of these towns are cheap because the market is honest. Some of these towns are cheap because nobody tells you why until you already own the house. Subscribe if you want the version of Appalachia that doesn't come with a filter. Let's get into it. Number 12, Welch, West Virginia. Welch is the county seat of McDowell County, tucked into the Cumberland Mountains in the southernmost tip of the state. In 1950, McDowell County had almost 99,000 people and was one of the top coal-producing counties in the entire nation. Today, the county holds under 17,000 people, and it is losing residents faster than any other county in West Virginia. That is not decline. That is a slow-motion evacuation that has been running for 70 years. The median household income sits around $30,000. Close to a third of the population lives below the poverty line, and the child poverty rate runs even higher than that. The median home value is under $50,000, which sounds like a bargain until you learn the entire county has been classified as a food desert, meaning there is nowhere left to buy fresh groceries without driving out of the county first. A local minister told a national news crew that the promises of economic revival have been repeated for decades with nothing to show for it. Here's the detail that should stop you cold. McDowell County has, in recent years, still struggled with unclean drinking water in some communities in the same country that put a man on the moon. President Kennedy stood in Welch in 1963 and said he could not accept that Americans here had been out of work for years, not weeks. 6 decades later, the county he was describing has fewer people and less industry than it did the day he said it.
Number 11. Bluefield, West Virginia. Bluefield once called itself the gateway to the Southland, a booming railroad hub shipping coal out of the mountains by the trainload. The Norfolk and Western Railway built its wealth here. That wealth left with the coal jobs. And what stayed behind is a smaller city carrying an oversized crime problem. Bluefield shows up regularly on regional danger rankings, and not for a single bad neighborhood. Drug activity, primarily tied to the same opioid and methamphetamine pipeline hitting the rest of central Appalachia, has pushed both violent and property crime well above what a city this size should see. Areas around the downtown corridor report rising gang-related activity, a term that used to be reserved for cities 20 times Bluefield's population. Revitalization efforts exist. So does the reason revitalization is necessary in the first place. The irony sits in the architecture. Drive through downtown Bluefield and you'll see turn-of-the-century brick buildings built to look permanent, built by people who assumed the coal money would never stop. It stopped. Number 10. Hazard, Kentucky. The name writes its own jokes, and Hazard has heard all of them. What the jokes miss is that this eastern Kentucky town carries one of the higher per capita crime rates in the state, concentrated in burglary and assault, and it did not get there by accident. Perry County, where Hazard sits, rode the coal boom for generations and then absorbed the bust harder than almost anywhere else in the state. When the mines cut back, they didn't just cut wages, they cut the entire economic floor out from under the town. What replaced mining wasn't a new industry. It was, for a meaningful share of the population, substance abuse and the crime that follows it. Residents describe nighttime safety as a real and specific concern, not a vague anxiety. Here's the part nobody puts in the relocation brochure. A coal town's economy doesn't fail gently. It fails in a way that takes the tax base, the school funding, and the healthcare access down with it, all at once, and then asks the people who are left to rebuild a hospital system with a shrinking population and a shrinking budget. Number 9. Beckley, West Virginia. Beckley is a small city, but its violent crime numbers punch well above its size class, and the reason is almost entirely pharmaceutical. Methamphetamine and opioid trafficking drive the bulk of the violence here, feeding into car theft, burglary, and assault clusters concentrated in specific neighborhoods on the city's east side. The uncomfortable math is this: Beckley isn't dangerous because it's a big city with big city anonymity. It's dangerous because a comparatively small population is absorbing a drug supply chain sized for a much bigger market, and the local economy never replaced the coal and manufacturing jobs that used to keep people occupied with something other than the drug trade. If you're picturing this scenic mountain town with a walkable downtown and cheap real estate, you're not wrong. You're just missing the second half of the sentence. Number 8. Martin County, Kentucky. In October 2000, a coal slurry impoundment above Martin County ruptured and sent more than 300 million gallons of black sludge into the region's creeks and water supply, one of the largest environmental disasters in the eastern United States, larger by volume than the Exxon Valdez spill. That was 25 years ago. Parts of the county's water system have still not fully recovered. Residents here have gone extended stretches under boil water advisories, some paying full water bills for taps that produced water discolored enough that people wouldn't bathe their children in it. National news crews have returned to Martin County repeatedly over the years specifically because the water crisis refuses to resolve, becoming a symbol used in state and national politics on both sides of the aisle. The poverty rate runs well above the state average, unemployment lingers, and the coal jobs that built the county are mostly gone. Picture this. You move here because the land is beautiful and the mortgage is nothing. Then you find out that nothing is also roughly what confidence you should have in what comes out of your faucet. Number 7. Gary, West Virginia. Gary was once a company town in the truest sense, built by U.S. Steel to house the miners who dug coal to feed the company's mills in Indiana. At its peak it had thousands of residents, its own hospital, its own schools, a company store, a company church. It was a functioning small city entirely owned by a corporation 2 states away. The mines closed. U.S. Steel left. And because Gary wasn't a town that grew organically, it had almost nothing to fall back on once the company that built it walked away. Today Gary's population is a small fraction of its peak, with entire blocks of company housing sitting empty or collapsed. It is less a struggling town than a town-shaped skeleton. The lesson from Gary applies to a dozen coal camps just like it scattered across McDowell, Mingo, and Logan counties. A one-employer town is not a community with an economy. It's a bet that the employer never leaves. Coal camps across Appalachia lost that bet decades ago and never got their money back. Number 6. Institute, West Virginia. Welcome to Chemical Valley, the stretch of the Kanawha River Valley where the Kanawha and Elk Rivers meet and where a dense cluster of chemical plants has operated for close to a century. Institute is home to a Union Carbide, later Bayer, now Bayer crop science facility that produces methyl isocyanate, or MITE, the same chemical involved in the 1984 Bhopal disaster in India that killed thousands. In 2008, an explosion at this exact facility killed 2 workers. In 2010, a chemical release sent a plume over the community that hospitalized dozens of residents. The plant makes the same compound that killed thousands of people overseas, and it operates a few hundred feet from a residential community and a historically black college, West Virginia State University. Homes in Institute and the surrounding Kanawha Valley communities are affordable in the way Texas City, Texas homes are affordable. The discount isn't about crime or poverty. It's about what happens when the wind shifts and you're standing downwind of a plant handling one of the most lethal industrial chemicals ever manufactured. You can check the air quality index here the way people in other towns check the pollen count. Number 5. Owsley County, Kentucky. If you want the single poorest county in the continental United States by several measures, this is it. Owsley County, home to about 4,000 people in the town of Boonville, has carried a poverty rate near 40% for years, a figure so persistent that national outlets return to profile it roughly once a decade like clockwork. Jobs here largely don't exist in the way jobs exist elsewhere. What replaces steady employment is a patchwork of disability benefits, food assistance, and a local economy that runs on a rotation of pills, dollar store goods, and whatever seasonal logging or timber work still exists. Life expectancy trails the national average by years. The county built a genuinely impressive public library a few years back, a real point of local pride, standing in a county where the combined value of every home wouldn't cover a single big lottery jackpot. Would you take a life in a county this poor if the trade-off was total peace and quiet, genuinely low crime, and a mortgage payment smaller than most people's phone bill? Some families here will tell you it's worth it. The census data says most of America has decided it isn't. Number 4. Keystone, West Virginia. Keystone is a town of a few hundred people that, at its lowest point, became a national case study in small-town corruption. In the early 2000s, federal investigators found that Keystone's mayor, police chief, and town clerk had been selling off municipal property, embezzling grant money, and running the town's finances like a personal account. The scandal made national news specifically because of how small the town was. There was almost nothing left to steal, and officials found a way to steal it anyway. That was 2 decades ago, but Keystone never really recovered the population or the trust it lost. It sits in McDowell County, the same county as Welch, absorbing the exact same economic collapse, except with the added asterisk that when the town needed functioning local government the most, it didn't have one. The takeaway isn't really about Keystone specifically. It's about what happens to civic institutions in towns that have been bleeding population and tax revenue for 50 straight years. Eventually there isn't enough oversight left to prevent this kind of failure, and there isn't enough left to steal to make headlines when it happens again somewhere else. Number 3. Charleston, West Virginia. The state capital should, in theory, be the strongest economy in the region. Charleston has government jobs, a real downtown, cultural institutions, and none of the single industry fragility of a coal camp. And yet Charleston consistently posts violent crime figures well above the national average, concentrated heavily in specific corridors like the West Side and parts of Kanawha City. The city sits at the geographic heart of the opioid crisis that has defined West Virginia's public health data for over a decade. West Virginia has posted some of the highest overdose death rates of any state in the country for years running, and the state capital is not exempt from that math just because it has a Capitol dome. Drug-related violence, property crime tied to addiction, and a shrinking population that hasn't been replaced by new industry combine into a city that looks fine on a postcard and looks very different in the FBI's Uniform Crime Report. If the capital city of a state can't outrun this pattern, that tells you something about how deep the pattern runs everywhere else on this list. Number 2. Portsmouth, Ohio. Portsmouth sits at the northern edge of Appalachia, where the Scioto River meets the Ohio, and for close to 2 decades it carried a nickname it never asked for: the pill mill capital of America. At the peak of the crisis in the 2000s and early 2010s, this city of under 20,000 people had more pain clinics per capita than almost anywhere else in the country, prescribing painkillers by the truckload with minimal oversight until state and federal crackdowns finally shut most of them down. The clinics closed. The addiction they created did not close with them. Portsmouth's population has been shrinking for decades, its once thriving shoe manufacturing industry long gone, its historic downtown flood wall famously painted with murals celebrating a prosperous past that the present doesn't resemble. Poverty runs well above the state average, and the opioid epidemic that started here as a business model left behind a generation of addiction, broken families, and a foster care system stretched past its limits. Scioto County's flood wall murals show steamboats, shoe factories, and a bustling market street. Stand in front of them and turn around, and you're looking at storefronts that have been empty for years. The murals aren't nostalgia. They're a receipt for what left. Number 1. Huntington, West Virginia. On the morning of August 15, 2016, Huntington's emergency responders answered 28 overdose calls in roughly 4 hours. Not over a week. Not over a day. 4 hours. It made national news, inspired a documentary, and became the single moment most Americans point to when they think about the opioid crisis in Appalachia. It was not an aberration. It was a bad morning in a city that has had a lot of bad mornings. Huntington, home to around 45,000 people along the Ohio River, has carried the unofficial and thoroughly earned title of overdose capital of America for the better part of a decade. The overdose death rate here has run many times the national average in peak years. This is a city that built an entire specialized quick response team, pairing paramedics, police, and faith leaders to follow up with overdose survivors within 72 hours, because the standard emergency response wasn't enough to keep people alive. Here's what makes Huntington number 1 instead of a smaller, more obviously depressed town. Huntington is not a ghost town. It has a real university, Marshall, a functioning downtown, and a healthcare system that, by necessity, has become one of the most sophisticated addiction response operations in the entire country. It looks, on the surface, like a normal small American city. Then you learn that this normal small American city has spent a decade fighting off an overdose crisis so severe it required inventing new emergency response models that other cities now study and copy. The Huntington Quick Response Team has been credited with real, measurable drops in repeat overdoses in recent years. That is genuine progress. It is also progress measured against a starting point most cities have never had to survive. Going from catastrophic to merely severe is progress on a spreadsheet. It doesn't erase what an entire generation of this city lived through to get there. These 12 places are real, and the coal jobs that used to hold them together are not coming back at the scale that would matter. Cheap land in Appalachia isn't a mistake by the market. It's usually an honest price for what you're actually buying. Isolation, thin healthcare access, an economy still absorbing a 50-year-old industrial collapse, and in more places than anyone wants to admit, a drug crisis that reshaped entire towns from the inside out. If you almost moved to one of these places because the listing photos look like a postcard, like this video, because somebody should have told you what the postcard leaves out.